Good morning, everyone. This is Laura Plummer. I am the statewide Assistive Technology Program Coordinator for the state of Wisconsin, and I'm excited to welcome you to our second webinar for this year for WisTech, which is Wisconsin's Assistive Technology Act program. So this training is brought to you by WisTech, as well as the Department of Health Services here in Wisconsin. So we'll do a little bit of housekeeping, and then we're going to learn all about augmentative and alternative communication from two great speakers today. So we are on the webinar platform, which means that your microphones and your videos are automatically turned off. We welcome your participation either through the chat or the Q&A section. And our speakers will entertain questions kind of throughout, and they'll be monitoring chat, as will I, so we can let you get your questions out while we're on that topic that you're thinking about. We do have ASL interpreters available on screen, as well as CART captioning. So that is accessed using the menu button on the bottom. We are recording this webinar. It will be uploaded and available on our WisTech YouTube channel. That usually takes a few days for us to do that. We are providing CRC credits and CEU credits. Those will be accessed through the survey. So we'll have a short survey that will pop up after the webinar, and then it will also be emailed to you tomorrow as a follow-up in case you jump off the webinar and don't complete that survey. In order to get the CRC and CEU certificates, you will need to complete the survey and answer a couple questions. Those certificates are emailed out within 30 days of the webinar. So if it's been past 1 month, then reach out if you didn't get the CRCs and CEUs. But we also just welcome your feedback and want to hear other ideas and other trainings you're interested in. Checking my list here. I think we are good to go. So I am very excited to work with and bring to you two folks that we've done a lot of collaboration in the state around communication. And so we've got Abigail Marx and Jennifer Schubring. I know they have introduction slides, so I'm going to save reading their bios and let them share some information about them. And we've got lots to learn over the next couple hours, so take it away. And thank you.
Hello, everyone. We do have the QR code in the upper left corner, and we have that repeated on a few slides. So if you miss it, it will pop up again. And then the bit.ly is bit.ly/ in caps ABC AAC 2024. And Laura is also going to send out a link to the PDF in the survey as well. So,
all right. So we're excited to be presenting today. Jennifer and I are co-presenting on the ABCs of AAC. So talking about essential kind of foundational knowledge about augmentative and alternative communication. I am a speech language, my name is Abby, I should start with, and I'm a speech language pathologist here in Wisconsin. I've worked in AAC since the start of my career over 12 years ago, first at the Weissman Center AAC programs, and now working for a nonprofit organization providing supports remotely for people with a diagnosis of ALS. So I'm excited to be here talking with you all today.
And my name is Jennifer Schubring. I live in the Green Bay area, so shout out to everybody in Green Bay. I am a speech language pathologist with an expertise in AAC. I've been at it for a long time. I started actually at the Communication Aids and Systems Clinic as an undergrad at UW-Madison, and then I was very fortunate to go to Penn State and work with one of the leading researchers in the country, Dr. Janice Light. I've worked in a lot of different settings over the years, but for the past 16-ish years, I've worked in the public schools, and currently I run our assistive technology program in the Green Bay area public schools. And I also have a private practice in the area building AAC. So today we're going to go through a few learning objectives. First, we're going to talk about 3 applications of AAC technology. So we're going to talk about the education setting. I'm going to kind of focus on that since that's more my area of expertise, community living and employment. And we're going to also learn about the classifications of AAC technology and really kind of focus more on what the speech language pathologists can do in order to help feature match those tools. And then also you're going to be able to outline the steps needed to follow an AAC assessment and implementation. We're going to go over the basics. What is assistive technology in AAC? Again, talk about those keys to assessment and intervention. Abby and I are both going to present a profile. So just sort of a hypothetical profile of individuals, compilation of kind of what we see in a lot of the questions we get. So I'm going to focus on a child with autism, and Abby is going to present an adult with an acquired or progressive diagnosis. At the end of each one of these sections, we do have a little bit of time, and we're going to try to answer a question or two just so you don't have to hold all your questions until the end. So make sure you definitely post those questions in the chat. If we can answer them in the chat, we will. Otherwise, we might save 1 or 2 to answer during that little bit of time that we have in between sections, and then we'll take some questions at the end. Just keep in mind, if you're posting anything about an individual that you're working with or your own child, keep in mind just privacy and make sure you're keeping out some of those details because this is being recorded. So we're going to go over the definitions. What is assistive technology and AAC? And we're going to try to keep this a little bit shorter so we can kind of get to the meat of that assessment and intervention as well. So assistive technology actually has 2 different parts. It can be a device, which is any item, a piece of equipment, a product system, and it's something that you can either maybe buy commercially on Amazon or from a device manufacturer. It can be something that's modified and something that's customized. So it doesn't necessarily have to be purchased through some vendor. It can be something that you also make yourself. And it's going to be a tool that you're going to use to increase, maintain, or improve the capabilities of an individual with a disability. So we're going to talk a little bit more just about what are assistive technology, AAC, or augmentative and alternative communication devices. So there's lots of branches of assistive technology, but today in this webinar, we're really focusing on that augmentative and alternative communication. So AAC is all the ways someone may communicate besides verbal speech. So you can see the little meme that I have in the upper right-hand corner. There's a little baby and she's all excited because somebody's like moving it looks like an ice cream cone to her face, and she gets really happy and excited and smiley. So that's that nonverbal communication that you're seeing. We communicate in lots of different ways. It doesn't necessarily just have to be that verbal speech. Augmentative modes include ways that will add to verbal speech. So we have some people that do use verbal speech, maybe not highly intelligible to individuals outside of their immediate family. So they may also use an augmentative mode in order to augment that verbal speech. And then we have alternative communication, which may replace that verbal speech for somebody who doesn't use mouth words or doesn't use verbal speech at all. And again, we can kind of further subdivide augmentative and alternative communication into that unaided, just like that meme we have there. So you don't need anything other than your body in order to communicate. So that could be sign language, gestures, pointing, or that cute baby and her facial expressions. And then we have aided communication, and we're going to focus a lot more on the aided communication within this presentation today. So we're going to talk about some low tech. So those are non-electronic ways to communicate. Calendar systems, communication boards. It could be actual objects that you might be holding up a some goldfish crackers or a different type of cracker, some Ritz crackers. Which one do you want? And somebody is maybe pointing or reaching towards the actual object. Mid-tech devices are those multi-message devices that have printed overlays usually and have recorded speech on them. High-tech devices, which are usually electronic devices that have recorded or that computerized synthesized speech, and then speech generating devices. And those are dynamic display devices. So that dynamic means that page is changing when you touch the screen, and they usually have voice output with them. So we talked about those assistive technology and AAC devices. The other part of that definition of assistive technology is services. And I think services are equally as important as the devices. You can provide a tool, but unless you have good services surrounding that tool, that's where we see a lot of device abandonment sometimes. And people get frustrated, reject that communication device, don't really want to use it. So assistive technology services really help to assist that individual with a disability in the selection, acquisition, and the use of that device. That could be through the evaluation. It could be in helping them purchase or lease or somehow acquire that device. It is selecting, customizing, maintaining, repairing those communication devices. A big part of my job in the schools is really coordinating with other therapies. So if a family is getting outside speech therapy or maybe even like equestrian therapy is really big in our area, really coordinating with those other therapies to make sure that they can use that device, not just at school, but also within those other therapies, and we're meeting their needs within all settings. Providing training or technical assistance to the family. Oftentimes in the schools, we are going out into the family's home sometimes and doing a home visit just to make sure that they're not just, again, communicating at school, but also in the home. And then technical assistance and training for professionals. So my colleague that does AT in the schools with me, her and I both met with all of our county caseworkers and talked to them about AAC funding, because we were getting a huge number of requests from county case managers just offering to pay for AAC devices, which wasn't always the best fit for that family. So we did a great training for all of them, which has really sort of changed the way that we're seeing AAC referrals come through in the district. So lots of training needs with those AAC services. I also want to mention that in the state of Wisconsin, the Department of Public Instruction was probably almost 2 years ago, released an assistive technology bulletin. And you can just, if the link is here, you can also just Google AT Bulletin in DPI Wisconsin and it will come up. But it has frequently asked questions. So it's sort of a question and answer format, and it answers a lot of questions from the school-based perspective of all assistive technology devices and services, but it does have a few questions that relate specifically to AAC. And then last year in the winter, the federal government, the Department of Ed, also came out with some nice AT guidance, and WisTech also has some of those like legal laws and things about what an individual has a right to have with AAC services and all of assistive technology. So there's a few links for you there as well. So let's talk a little bit more about AAC and the different low, mid, and high tech. But I first want to kind of talk to you a little bit about this AT continuum. So probably like 20, 30 years ago, you really, people would make you sort of prove yourself. So you had to start with those low tech supports and then work your way up to high tech. So on this image on the screen, it says a continuum of considerations for assistive technology for communication. And you would have to start by maybe eye gazing to those two objects, then work your way to like picture symbols. Then maybe you could have that mid-tech device. And then finally, if you could get through all of that to show you know, how smart you are, whatever it is that you could access it, then you would give somebody a high-tech dynamic display device. And what research has really shown is that is not true. You don't have to go that way. I work with a lot of 3-year-olds, and we have a lot of 3-year-olds in our district in early childhood who are already starting with high-tech AAC, and they are doing phenomenal. So just know that when we're going through that assessment and intervention piece, that it is, and when we're going through these different levels of AAC, that you don't have to start with one or the other. That assessment really should be dictating where we are starting. So low-tech tools, there's a bowl of candy on the slide, and that really kind of represents those real objects. Again, I had talked about, you know, maybe goldfish crackers and Ritz crackers and holding up those objects. We also have things called bliss symbols, which might be 3D tactile printed symbols that we can use. There are core boards. Right now, you're seeing a lot of core boards out on playgrounds. So you might go to the park and you might see a low-tech core board on the playground, so that an individual could communicate that they want to go down the slide or go swing, or maybe asking somebody if they want to play on the playground. But those low-tech supports are usually actual objects or paper-based supports. If you need a picture communication system in order to make those low-tech supports, we're kind of in the day and age now where Google Images has become really popular. You can search on Google Images, emojis, and emojis are being built into some of our AAC vocabularies. And then there's a really nice free online picture database if you just need something quick and easy, called opensymbols.org. That's great. And one of my favorites is Lesson Picks. Lesson Picks is great. At the time of this recording, it's $36 a year. So it's a really affordable solution for families that really want access to picture systems. And I do want to say low-tech AAC is really important to have. Even if you are using high-tech or a speech generating device. We can't always use that high-tech AAC, maybe if it's pouring rain outside, or maybe you're really fatigued and you just need a low-tech option, or you're traveling in a vehicle or something and can't have your device out. It's always great to have a low-tech backup of whatever system that you're using. Here's some mid-tech tools. I'm going to hold up on my screen. I got a couple of these here at my house. I know my screen's blurred, so you can kind of see. But we have a GoTalk. That's a multi-level device on the GoTalk. It has a button that you push and it changes levels. And then there's a page that pulls out and you can change that. So you might have a level for meal times, you might have a level for play times, you might have a bedtime routine level. We have single message devices. So those are Big Macs. They usually have one message or a sequence of messages that you can record. They're great for greetings or maybe something really quick that you want to say. And then on the right-hand side of the screen, we have some multisensory devices. And these devices really are for individuals that maybe cognitively still need a little bit of that actual object, or maybe they are blind or low vision and need to actually be able to have that tactile object to be able to feel, and then they can push a button on the device in order to speak that message as well. So there's lots of different types of mid-tech tools that are out there. And again, you may still use a high-tech device and still want one or two of these mid-tech tools in your arsenal of communication options. And then last, we have these high-tech tools. So these speech generating devices typically have dynamic screens. So I've got a variety of images up here of different types of devices. There's an eye gaze device. There's just an iPad off the shelf that you might purchase with a vocabulary app. This communication device is an iPad, but these are tactile overlays from Attainment Company, which is actually a Wisconsin company for individuals that have maybe low vision. And then down here in the lower right corner is Lamp Words for Life, and that is the VI edition. So it's meant for individuals who are blind, and it has a tactile key guard over it to help you orient on the screen to be able to communicate. And the image on the center, upper center of the screen has some pictures of some switches. So you might access with a communication device using scanning and a switch. Which gets us to our next slide of those access methods. People can access AAC in so many different ways, and it really should not be a barrier because there are just so many different tools out there as technology has changed over the years. We have direct selection, so pointing with a finger. Some people will even point with their toes. Using a head pointer, which might be like a hat with sort of a stick coming off of it. Switch access or scanning. So you can kind of see there's a picture up here of somebody who's doing some scanning with a head switch. We see eye gaze with like an E-tram board right here where you have the communication partner on one side and then an individual might be looking at the different objects. Here's somebody with doing some head pointing. And then even here's somebody that maybe has some memory issues and using not only a high-tech device, but also using something like a memory book to help that individual communicate. And I love this image in the upper right corner of somebody wearing a swimsuit with a kickboard in AAC, because again, we want to have those different ways to access and communicate. So I'm going to be in my pool in a little bit this afternoon because it is a hot one here in Green Bay today. But being able to communicate using a lot of different access methods is important. So we showed you a lot of different tools and devices out there. I just want to mention, because WisTech is sponsoring this webinar, that we have our statewide lending library, WisconsinAT4All.com, that has a variety of access tools that you can loan out, and even some iPads that anybody can loan out with an AAC device. You can loan those for 30 days. And anybody really with those DHS listed devices can check those out and try some of these before somebody might go out and purchase it on their own if they so choose. So, Abby, did we have any good questions in our chat at all? Does anyone have any questions on AT devices, services, those low, mid, high-tech tools?
Nothing in here yet, but please feel free to put some questions in. Like Jennifer said at the beginning, it's nice to be able to talk about it while we're still on the subject and before we move on to other topics. So if you have any burning questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat.
If you have not been to the WisconsinAT4All.com website, I would highly recommend just searching and looking through some of the library. There's tons of tools out there that have been purchased that you can try before you buy. It's just such a great tool to have access to for all of your assistive technology needs.
Absolutely. And the link is here in the slide as well, so you can get to that. Okay. Not seeing any questions yet. Jennifer and I will kind of take turns. Oh, here's a great question. You mentioned the legal rights. Do you have a quick summary of that? We are going to talk a little bit later on about funding for communication systems. And so we'll talk a little bit about some of the legal rights related to funding and obtaining AAC then. But I don't know, Jennifer, if you have anything else you want to add about kind of the access and the services pieces.
No, I mean, I think Laura is if you really are having a lot of issues, Laura is a wealth of information and can kind of direct you to specific people within the state probably. And I know some of you are from other states. So, reaching out to your AT Act program and asking some of those questions would be great. It was through a lot of advocacy that I was on the group that helped with that AT bulletin from DPI, because there were so many questions and we found that every district was doing things a little bit different in Wisconsin. And so it really provided just this oversight for what should be our gold level of service. Our across the board, this is what every school district should be doing. And I think it was validated too then when the federal government came out with their guidance, because a lot of what we had put first in our statewide AT bulletin showed up within that federal government guidance as well. So, I think it's just really important for people to know their rights and know what they deserve to have and what everybody should be provided with. So.
And Laura added in the chat some more information about the Wisconsin AT for All library and looking in your independent living center for where you live as kind of an initial place to look in that. And then anything listed under DHS are the iPads that are statewide and available there. And then Laura also included her contact information if you do have questions about legal rights, because they vary by setting. We have a question in the Q&A, Jennifer, about how someone can access lesson picks.
Lesson picks, you can just go to their website. You can try the Lesson Picks website and it just puts a watermark over it. So you get like the full features, all the access to it. You can play around with it. They have a great YouTube channel for learning how to use it. But honestly, we switched from one tool to Lesson Picks in our district, and our teachers have figured out how to use it. And sometimes, especially some of those older teachers who've been using a tool for a long time have a hard time making that switch. And just about everybody has liked Lesson Picks because of its ease of use. But check out their YouTube channel. They do monthly free trainings too, webinars like this to help people get started with it. It's just a really great tool. And the company is very, very responsive. So. But their website, lessonpicks.com.
Perfect. And then there's one more question in the chat that we can answer. Is a speech therapist a good place to start for someone who could maybe benefit from AAC? This is for an adult. And I would just say, yes, Julie, the best place to start is with a speech language pathologist. Typically for many funding sources, and we'll talk about this later, there's a requirement that there be an assessment by a speech language pathologist for AAC systems. But even if the funding source doesn't require that, our licensure and our training includes information about how to support somebody who's learning to communicate through different modalities. And so a speech therapist is a great place for you to get at least that initial support for figuring out what might make sense. Jennifer, do you have anything to add to that?
The only thing I would say is that not all speech therapists do feel comfortable with AAC. So certainly if you're reaching out to like a medical setting to find out if a hospital clinic offers AAC services, ask those questions. Because I think, find somebody who has experience with it and feels comfortable doing it. Some people feel obligated to do it just because they're supposed to do it, but, ask some of those questions that you're going to learn today, and really find someone you feel comfortable with.
And this is Laura. I wanted to just add, I heard a really great explanation once that kind of addresses what you both are sharing and who to work with and who to connect to get services. And it all started, when we got our iPads and we got our speech apps, and suddenly everybody could become an AAC person because they had an iPad and they had a program with pictures, and then it spoke out. And how it was explained to me, and it's what I've always shared, is, if it's one thing to use a device with pictures and then they speak out. So basically you're just pointing to a picture and it's talking out loud for you. If you're truly wanting this to be used as a language and a communication tool, that's where the background of a speech language pathologist comes in. So they're building language and building communication, whereas I'm not a speech language pathologist. And yes, I can set an iPad up with pictures and words. And for some individuals, if that's what they have language, they're just trying to communicate point A to B. Yeah. But if they're really wanting a language, because behind all those pictures, you have a full language system, your nouns, your verbs, your sentence structures. And so that's where that speech language pathologist comes in. I thought I'd share that differentiation.
It's a really
Yeah, great point, Laura. Thank you.
Yes, and it's a nice segue actually into our next section. So well done. So perfectly. So we're going to move to talking a little bit about AAC assessment and intervention and kind of where you go next. So you've seen some of the tools that are out there, and then how do you kind of get started with that and get things going for your client or your family member or whoever it is you're working with. Go ahead, Laura or Jennifer. Okay, so let's start with the AAC assessment piece. And we want to really highlight that this is a collaborative process. It's important to involve multiple stakeholders and individuals in the assessment process. And that starts at the very center with the individual who's going to be using the communication system, whether it's a child or a very beginning communicator or an advanced communicator or adult. Either way, the person needs to be at the center of the assessment so that you're really selecting tools and teaching strategies that are a good fit for that individual. And then along with that, their parents and their family members are the people that know that person best. So their input is equally important in determining a system that's going to work well for the person. And then teaching them how to use that system across their environments with different partners, because as Jennifer said at the beginning, getting the tool is just one part of the equation. And then the services and the teaching about how to use that tool for communication and language development is equally essential. Other people on the team include that speech language pathologist who has expertise in language and communication development. So like Laura was mentioning, helping somebody really not just learn that if I touch a picture, I get a thing, but learn how words go together to create meaning and how they can access those words within the communication system. The occupational and physical therapists are important in terms of access to those systems. How are they going to use them? Where are they going to be positioned or transported with the individual? And then vision and hearing specialists, educators, medical providers, all of these people bring unique knowledge and experience to supporting an individual who has maybe different sensory or motor or communication needs. And their input really helps with creating or selecting a system that's going to work the best for that person. And everyone shares a role in kind of the teaching and the use of the AAC system. So that includes the basic operation of the system, creating opportunities for communication and encouraging their use of AAC to be an active participant in those interactions. And then also modeling and mentoring. So getting peers involved, getting other people involved to say, I want to talk with you, and this is a way that we can do that together. The socialization and the friendship that you can develop with somebody who's using AAC is the same as the socialization and the friendships that you can develop with other people. And we need to really open the opportunities and make sure that that's available. There's a resource on this slide to a roles and responsibilities checklist that can be kind of nice when you're working with a team around implementing AAC. And it talks about the different things that need to happen for the device to be useful and successful. Like it needs to be charged, it needs to be customized. People need to be making it available. And so it's kind of a way for a team to work together and identify who's going to be responsible and how are we going to make that happen.
And Abby, I just want to jump in because I think it's really important, this socialization, respect, this friendship are really important to highlight because Dr. Janice Light has a famous quote, there's more to life than cookies. We often focus on some of like the basic AAC, like requesting food, but that's not always motivating. What's motivating are those social aspects of AAC, creating friendships. So it's really important to get these people involved in building that AAC system for that individual.
Absolutely. Okay, you can go to the next slide. So in addition to being a collaborative process, the AAC assessment is also a dynamic process. And what we mean by this is kind of at the bottom of the slide here. Assessment is a process, not an event. You don't do one session with a couple of tools and you know exactly what the person needs to be able to communicate functionally. Really, it's a process of looking at the individual skills and their learning potential. And that can include looking through their chart and doing interviews, because you really need to look at both for children and beginning communicators, their developmental needs and how this communication system is going to support them over time, building on their current communication skills and building them towards, like Laura was saying, a language system that is functional and allows them to communicate what they want to communicate when they want to communicate it. But we also need to think about more advanced communicators and adults, and not that those are exclusive, right? Like you can have a child who's an advanced communicator as well, but thinking about people who are maybe have a diagnosis that's changing how they communicate. So we'll talk more later in the presentation in the profiles about an individual with a degenerative condition where they may be using speech for most of their life, but then they develop ALS or multiple sclerosis or have a stroke or some type of diagnosis that results in a change or a loss of speech. And so we also need to be thinking in the assessment about how their needs are changing over time, both in an upward trajectory for those developing communication, as well as in a progressive trajectory for those who might be losing some of the ways they've communicated. When we think about assessment tools, we really need to think about criterion-based and dynamic assessment. And what we mean by that is assessments where we're creating opportunity and we're using learning and teaching as well as assessing and looking for growth. So in a dynamic assessment for AAC, we're creating opportunities, we're modeling how that communication system or tool can be used, and then we're observing how the child or the individual is responding to those tools and adapting to the activities that we're using them in. So it's giving us some really dynamic information about how they can learn about AAC and how those tools might be supportive for their functional communication in the long run. And we do want to note that standardized tests may not be appropriate for individuals who use AAC. Often standardized assessments are primed for people who have typical motor skills, typical sensory skills, often typical language skills. And so being able to participate in and respond to those tests often can be difficult or sometimes even not possible for people who are using AAC. I'm sure you've seen a standardized assessment where there are 4 pictures on a page and you say, point to the blank. Well, if a person can't use their hands to point to something, they're automatically excluded from showing their knowledge on that test. And so not that standardized assessments can't be used at all. We just have to use our judgment and be thoughtful about the results of those kinds of tests for individuals who can't respond in the same ways or may not be able to participate in the same ways. Okay. So then kind of the gold standard of AAC assessment is this feature matching. And what we mean by feature matching is that the individual has particular skills and knowledge, motor skills, sensory skills and communication skills that they're starting with. And then the devices or the communication systems all have different features like the hardware of the device. So what kind of, what physically is the device? The software of the device is like what program is on it, whether it's something more dynamic, like Jennifer was describing for high-tech systems, or maybe something that's more static and it kind of stays, it's got maybe paper overlays that go in and out. We also need to think about the page set and the language that's presented on a device. So by page set, we mean kind of what words are shown, how are they shown, are there pictures or text or both? Are those words aligned in a grid with a different button for each word? Or is it more of a photo or a picture that has words embedded within the photo? So all of those are features that can be available on different AAC systems. And then the access method for how the person is going to actually use that device. So are they going to use their hands or toes or another body part to point directly to items? Are they going to use switches where the device will scan through options and they select a switch to activate it? Are they going to use their eye gaze to point or select things, or a head pointer? So all of these different features can be changed and adjusted and customized to an individual. So that feature matching assessment process is really looking at the needs of the individual, the features of the communication system, and matching those together dynamically to create something that's going to work functionally for the person. And remember, because assessment is dynamic, this is something that can change over time. Someone may start with a communication system with a particular page set, and as their language skills and their communication skills grow, they may advance to more words, more buttons, more things. So keeping in mind that feature matching is also a dynamic process. All right. So now that we know kind of how you do that assessment, or how that what a quality assessment includes, this is kind of the process to obtain an AAC system for someone. And this applies especially to those high-tech AAC systems where they have that dynamic screen, and often they're more expensive and funded by other funding sources. And so we start with that initial evaluation where we're getting that in-depth background information. And remember, it's really important to think about their strengths and their communication interests, because for each individual, you need that system and the communication they're going to do with it to be motivating in order for them to want to use it. And then we move into the trials phase where you are typically trying at least 3 different communication systems. This can vary, but I think kind of standard practice is to try at least 3 so you can really get a sense of the different features of those systems and what's the best match for the client's skills and needs. Then you might move into a rental phase. This is especially important, or sometimes required by certain funding sources. So for example, insurances, if they're going to purchase a dedicated communication device, which we'll talk more about in a little bit, they often require a rental. So this is a 4-week loan where the communication system is available across environments. The person can take it to school, to work, into the community, they have it at home, and they're really using it in their daily routines and activities to confirm if it is a consistent and useful fit for their functional communication. If that is confirmed, then you would use documentation from the rental to make a purchase recommendation. And again, the requirements for a purchase recommendation really vary based on the payer and whether that's insurance or another funding source. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then we never want to forget what Jennifer started us out with, is that ongoing support piece. So getting the tools into their hands is only the first step. And then continuing to support language growth and independent communication is an ongoing process to make sure that the person, if they are a beginning communicator, is learning functional language and learning about how to put words together to create different meaning. Or for a person who has maybe fully functional language but is experiencing a progressive diagnosis, making sure that the tool is adapting and changing over time to meet those changing needs. So now we're going to start talking about funding for speech generating devices, and we'll cover each of these different areas listed on the slide in more depth. So we can start with talking about insurance funding. Thank you. Okay, so for insurance funding sources, there are several listed on the left side of the slide here: Medicare, Medicaid, TRICARE, which is the military service insurance, and then some private insurances or HMOs like Ports, Bean, and UHC have different policies about what they cover. It's important to know that Medicare and Medicaid, Medicare, which is federal funding, and Medicaid, which is state by state funding, both currently cover speech generating devices for individuals who can prove what's called medical necessity for that device. And it's also important to know that when Medicaid is managed by a private insurance, so sometimes you'll see someone has Quartz Badger Care or a GHC Badger Care. If a private insurance like that is managing Medicaid, they are also required to cover the same level as Medicaid, straight Medicaid. And so those sources will fund communication devices as long as they meet certain requirements and guidelines. If you look on the right side of the slide, we have some information listed about speech generating devices, or SGD is one of the terms you'll hear. And then durable medical equipment, or DME, is the other one you'll hear. DME is a term that's used across assistive technology. So for example, a wheelchair or a bath chair or a walker, those are durable medical equipment as well. And as long as you meet certain requirements for the speech generating device to qualify as DME, those can be funded by insurance. But it is important to also know that in Wisconsin, the recommendation for a speech generating device, or an SGD, has to come from a licensed speech language pathologist with state licensure through the Department of Safety and Professional Services, or DSPS. So like Jennifer was saying, if you're reaching out to different speech language pathologists to find out who might be able to help you with this assessment, you want to ask them about their licensure and if they are licensed to make a communication device recommendation to insurance. You should also know that different insurances have different coverages. So for those private insurances, you just want to make sure that you check the plans, because some of them have exclusions, or some of them have different requirements for how long the rental might need to be in order to cover a system. So those are really individual to your company and their plans. And so just reach out and talk with your insurance company about that directly is the best way to find out.
I think a lot of families have really high deductibles now, individuals do, so that's something else to consider. I know we have worked with our school social workers for individuals that have some sort of a medical diagnosis, and our school social workers have helped them apply for like Katie Beckett, which is based on disability and not how much money you make. And so you have to sometimes get a little bit creative with insurance, or even start to talk about it. Am I better off just purchasing something out of pocket if I have maybe a direct selector who can access an iPad or something, just because those deductibles can also be so high. So lots to consider when you're talking about insurance. It's not easy and it's always changing.
Yes, really good point. Okay. So in addition to insurance as an option for funding, there are other county and state funds available in Wisconsin that can sometimes be used to cover communication systems. So children funding, like the Children's Long-Term Support Waiver, or CLTS, or the Children's Community Options Program, CCOP, those programs can sometimes fund systems, especially if there are systems that aren't fundable by insurance. So if they don't meet those requirements to be considered durable medical equipment, things like mid-tech communication devices do not qualify in that. And so if someone would benefit from like a Big Mac or a step-by-step that Jennifer was showing earlier as a learning tool for communication, those often can be funded through other sources like these. For adults, similarly, the Medicaid waiver programs like Family Care, Iris, and Partnership can also cover communication systems. Again, these are very individual, like insurance companies, where you need to speak with the care manager for any of these programs and find out what the process is, but they can be a great place to contact if communication systems need to be purchased. And then the Telecommunications Equipment Purchase Program, or TEP, is another program that's funded through the state that offers support for equipment that's necessary for telephone communication. So if an individual is unable to communicate over the telephone using kind of typical dialing and making a call and talking through the receiver, if an AAC system would be usable to talk over a phone, it could potentially qualify for funding through TEP. And we've included the website here so that you can learn more about TEP and what kinds of equipment are approved or available through that funding. All right. Thinking about individuals who are still in school or who are transition age into adulthood, there are also our funding options through schools or through DVR. So starting with DVR, the Department of Voc Rehab, school transition for children typically starts at age 14, and then obviously DVR supports people into adulthood with their ability to work or participate in those kinds of vocational activities. And one of the tenets of DVR funding is to provide rehabilitation technology in order for an individual with a disability to gain employment. So if having a speech generating device or other AAC system will support either a transition age youth who is kind of in that 14 to 18 year range, or an adult who is working in some kind of supported employment, DVR funds can sometimes pay for that communication equipment. Again, we have a link on the slide to a YouTube video resource that talks about AT Forward here in Wisconsin, the AT Forward program working with DVR about cost sharing, as well as other funding for AAC and AT equipment through DVR. And then talking about schools and kind of the funding for school or through schools, we want to really emphasize that if a speech generating device is found to be medically necessary for someone, schools are not required to pay for those systems, even if they're the one that identifies, the school is the one that identifies that it's necessary. Rather, they have an onus to help acquire and provide that system, but it doesn't have to be them who pays for it. So I think that's something that comes up frequently in our state where speech language pathologists in schools will feel like, if I make a recommendation for a communication system and they can't get it paid for, then the school is going to be on the hook to pay for it, and my district can't do that, or whatever the circumstances might be. But we need to remember that if the device is proven to be medically necessary according to those insurance guidelines, insurance can pay for that system for the person, knowing that one of the environments they're going to use it in is school. And so that's important to differentiate, that just because a speech language pathologist in the schools makes the recommendation doesn't necessarily mean the school is on the hook to pay for it. And Jennifer, I'll let you jump in if you have others to add to that, but I think, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so that DPI AT bulletin document clearly outlines that. So if anybody, if you're a school speech therapist or a teacher, or somebody listening to this right now, a lot of our special ed directors don't necessarily understand that either. So you can take that AT bulletin to them and say, you know, just I would like to try some AAC. I want to go through the ATLC lending library on the AT for All website and try a couple devices. You know, like that doesn't mean that we have to pay for it for that individual. I think that sometimes alleviates some concern on the part of special ed directors as well. So that AT guidance document is really, really helpful, especially if you're in Wisconsin, because it was curated by the Department of Public Instruction. So
I think that's an important point. And one thing that can also be helpful with that advocacy is this Forward Health update. There's a link to it on the bottom right of the slide. That is kind of the regulation for Medicaid funding for communication systems. And it states that the title is Medicaid as the payer of last resort. However, in the bulletin or in the update, it clearly states that IDEA and other educational funding sources are actually the payer of last resort after Medicaid. And so again, if you're making a recommendation through a school for a communication system, but it is deemed medically necessary, Medicaid can cover that before. And so that document can also be a helpful advocacy tool, either within your district or outside of it as well. Okay. And then finally, we'll just touch on some other resources for funding. Let's say that some of these other ones don't work out, or the time frame of trying to obtain something is taking a long time. You could also look into some of these other options for getting funding. Grants through different organizations like Kiwanis or Lions Clubs, Rotary organizations, or philanthropic groups can all be ways to get coverage. We have one example here from the Wisconsin Upper Michigan Kiwanis Autism Project, which has a grant application right on their website where you can go in and apply for an iPad that would support someone with autism. And there are other examples of these as well. So checking for those kinds of supports. For adults, there are also often nonprofit supports based on diagnosis. So I added just a couple of examples here for people with ALS. The ALS Association of Wisconsin, or Team Gleason, is a national organization. So often those kinds of groups can also provide support for getting access to technology and equipment for communication. And then we wanted to include, I won't go into depth about Louis Skolinger's supports, but he is a wonderful advocate and an amazing bank of knowledge, wealth of knowledge about funding for AAC and assistive tech. And so he's got some great resources through the AAC Learning Center with Penn State, and some publications that are all linked on this slide, that if you're, and I think a lot of these relate to schools specifically, but a lot of the information is also relevant across settings. So I would highly recommend, if you're looking for funding or having difficulty getting approval for funding of systems, that you check out these resources as well. And Laura put in the chat that she has a funding resource that she'll share.
Thanks, Abby. This is Laura. It's not funding as in a grant for anyone, but the WIS loan program is an alternative finance program as part of the Assistive Technology Act. And so that is an opportunity for an individual to apply for a low interest loan for the purchase of assistive technology. And AAC would certainly fall under that. And the loan rate for that is 4%. And I will put a link in the chat.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, great. So in the interest of time, I'm going to try to kind of cruise through this next section. I know I'm being a little long-winded, but I think this information is important to cover. So we've talked about assessment and obtaining AAC. What do you do after you've got it? So this section is going to focus on intervention and kind of how the individuals around the person can help support that communication. And it looks like, oh, there's perfect. I was going to say, it looks like one of our slide or text boxes went away. So the roles of communication partners in AAC intervention cannot be understated. A person who is using a communication system needs partners around them who are supportive, creating learning opportunities, and helping them figure out how to use AAC to express themselves. So those roles include teaching both the language use and the interaction of using an AAC system. And we'll get more into depth about that in a little bit. And some of the things we just want to encourage or remind you are that technology is the tool, but the focus is really on communication. So try not to get too bogged down by learning all the ins and outs and technical aspects of the system, and really focus more on how that system is helping this person communicate and interact. And it's important to really stick with it and be persistent. Learning to communicate is not overnight. It doesn't happen in one or two interactions. It's really an ongoing process, and we need partners to be there to help expand and support that communication over time. And then the last thing is, you can do it. We need people to really be AAC champions, as we like to call them, and encourage the importance of that system for the individual. Okay, so we've got a few communication partner tips that are really important just to keep in mind when you're talking with anyone who's using AAC. So whether it's a very beginning emerging communicator all the way up to individuals who are fully literate and speaking in complete sentences and spelling things out, these tips are still important for everyone across that spectrum. And so we need to be respectful and respond to all communication attempts, especially for beginning communicators, to show them kind of the power of what they're communicating, but then also for those adults to respect that they have something important to say and giving them space to do so. Related to that, increased wait time is really important for people using AAC. No matter how adept and great they are at using a communication system, use of AAC is always slower than use of speech to communicate. And so we need to be able to create space and time for them to express what they want to express. I won't read all of these, but I think the other piece that I just want to skip to the bottom and really highlight that motivating interactions and activities are essential for people using AAC, especially those in the very beginning of learning to use this type of communication, because it is hard and it's work and they're learning a new skill and a new strategy. And so being able to do something that's motivating and exciting and having those interactions be engaging, that's what's important to really create that space and that motivation to use a communication system. Okay. One important strategy for communication partners, especially for those individuals at the beginning of learning to use AAC, is modeling. And so modeling is essentially talking with the communication system. So if I'm saying I want to go somewhere, I'm pointing to the pictures or the words on the communication system to model that language in a way that the person who's using the AAC could also say those same words. So modeling involves all communication partners, and it can be really fun to get peers involved in addition to the adults around that person. But I think it's important to highlight that we really need to be modeling more than we think. The amount of modeling needed for somebody to start producing that same language, this is a rough estimate, but they say at least 4 times more input than what we're expecting for output from a person. And why is it important? Well, really what we're doing is we're bridging the gap between the language input and output. So what I mean by that is if you're talking to somebody using speech, only speech, but that person's speech is not functional, the input they're getting from you is not an output strategy that they can turn around and use themselves. And so in order to bridge that gap, we need to be giving them input in the same system that we want them to use to give output back to us. So pointing to the pictures or the symbols or using the scanning or the eye gaze device to show them where the words are and how the words are functional is really essential for that natural language development. There is a resource on the bottom of this slide that I really love. It's a YouTube video called Aided Language Stimulation Explained, and there are links to both a Spanish and English version of the video. The video actually doesn't have any speech in it. It's meant to show you kind of the power of AAC through no verbal communication, but there is text about what the person is doing. So definitely check those out. Okay. So some other communication partner tools and strategies that are important to think about are visual supports and role play. So if you are expecting the person to use an AAC system that they've never used before, we got to show that, we got to give them tools and resources, but it's the same thing for communication partners. So if you've never seen this device before, or you don't know how to navigate it, it's going to be hard to model and support communication with that device. So on the left side of the slide, I have some picture examples of visuals where they might be simple individual pictures that help you create sentences or find the words on a communication system. So for example, the white picture is a sentence strip with I want, and then a blank space for the person to fill that in. Behind that, there's also a picture of a more robust communication system that has like a 6 or 7 by 10 grid of different words. And that allows you to also point and show sentences or words through the system. And that visual can help you kind of differentiate where to find those words and how to put them together. Similarly, cueing and prompting strategies are really important, as well as how you fade those. So on the right side of the slide, there's an image that talks about a prompt hierarchy that goes from what we would call least prompting to most prompting. So on the least end, or the lower end of the spectrum, it's things like an expectant pause and wait time, and nonverbal prompts like looking at them and looking at the communication system to see what they might say. And then towards the top of the spectrum, or the most prompts, is like a physical assist to help them say something or use something on the communication device. But again, these prompts need to be used thoughtfully and then faded to really lead to that person gaining independence with their communication system. Okay, I think in the interest of time, I'm just going to kind of skip over this, but there is some more information about different strategies and skills you might use as you're helping an individual use AAC or coaching someone else to do so. So feel free to kind of read through this part later too. Okay, so then kind of the final aspect that we want to talk about with AAC intervention is communicative competencies. And again, this is a lot of information. It's really in depth, so I'm going to breeze through it a little bit, but please feel free to come back to these slides and think about them, and also reach out to your resources for AAC, whether that's the speech language pathologists or other educators. AAC competence is really important. I think Jennifer mentioned what needs to happen in order to make sure a system is used and not abandoned. And what we see is that people need to develop skills across these areas really to make a system usable. So the first competency is linguistic competency. So that's the idea that they demonstrate receptive and expressive language skills, and they're able to communicate those using the system. So that might be growing their vocabulary. It might be developing use of verbs and grammar and things like that, like plurals and and past tenses. So that's really how they're using words on the AAC system to functionally communicate. The second competency is social. So just because you know some things you can say doesn't necessarily mean you know when to say them or how to say them to have them be functional within an interaction. So this is really that idea about how a person using AAC participates in interactions. Some examples of social skills or social competencies are initiating and maintaining conversations, and using a variety of communicative functions. So I think Jennifer mentioned at the beginning, we don't just want to teach how to request things, because that's not the only thing we communicate about. Being a truly social communicator involves asking and answering questions, using jokes, having social interactions and statements. And so kind of thinking about how we support all of those areas of communication. Operational competency is knowledge of how to actually operate the AAC system. So for individuals who are using a device that has voice output, it might be turning the volume up and down based on the environment they're in so that they can be heard. For somebody who's using alternative access, or even not that, transporting and positioning the device is really important for them to be able to use it. So this is another operational competency. Strategic competency is thinking about kind of what are the unique skills to that AAC system that allows them to use it functionally. So one example of this would be perhaps someone is able to speak, but they have dysarthria where their speech is hard to understand. Maybe more familiar people understand them and less familiar people don't. And that's one example, but there can be lots of people who there may be a reason why sometimes they use speech and sometimes they don't. And so recognizing when their speech isn't functional or there's a breakdown where someone's not understanding them, and then using the AAC device to repair that breakdown is one example of a strategic competency. Another example is for people who are bilingual and using more than one language, switching between those languages depending on which one their partner understands is strategic competency. And then finally, there's psychosocial competency. This is the skills required to adapt to communication challenges in everyday life. And so some examples of this are that motivation to use the AAC system. And so like we said, creating opportunities for learning and communicating that are really exciting is one step to make this, to help build this competency. Additionally, expressing emotions and using words or other features of the device might be a part of this competency. And I just want to highlight that often you're not working on any of these in isolation. So frequently when you're working with a communication system, you're working on more than one competency at a time. But it's important to make sure you are addressing all of these areas so that this AAC system becomes functional and usable and isn't abandoned by the person. Laura says we all code switch all day. For example, phone calls for one thing, texting for another, emailing for a third. I think that's such a good point.
Yeah, so that was a lot of information, and I think I'm going to kind of skip the questions. You can throw them in the chat because I think the profiles are going to kind of talk a little bit about the application of some of that. And so hopefully we have a little bit of time after those profiles if you have any assessment and intervention questions. And after seeing how it can kind of be applied a little bit, then you can go forward and ask, but feel free again to throw some of those in the chat. I do want to ask Abby, because I think I've heard you and the Weissman Center crew at one point talk about this. So somebody had asked if you need to have the Department of Health Services license in order to do an evaluation. Do you know the answer to that? So like your state license.
Yes.
I think.
So I think, yes, I think regardless of whether or not you have a DPI license, in order to sign the recommendation for insurance to purchase a communication device, you do have to be able to put that DSPS license number on the recommendation. So that's not to say like an SLP who has DPI licensure but not DSPS licensure could make and do an evaluation and identify a system. But if you're going to go through insurance for that funding piece, the person who's signing off on that recommendation needs to have the DSPS license, is my understanding.
Yeah, I have it. So I just don't even know. Like, I think you do have to have it. That was my impression too. So,
Yeah.
But to do an evaluation within the schools, I mean, if you're using just a school device and not going through insurance and your school district is providing that device, you certainly could do more of that evaluation piece. Again, just like Abby said, maybe not that insurance funded piece of things. So.
Mhm.
So we're going to talk a little bit about profile one. This individual is somebody who is 4 years old. Family speaks Spanish in the home, has older siblings that speaks both Spanish and English. Dad speaks both English and Spanish, and mom understands English but does not speak it. And then grandparents are also helping to take care of siblings and speak Spanish only. The individual received early intervention services through Birth to Three, and through the Birth to Three program, they worked on initiating. So some of these language pieces, communicating wants and needs through low-tech picture exchange, pointing, and imitating some verbal speech. The individual has some rote verbal speech. So we are starting to learn a lot more about Gestalt language processing. They're repeating some phrases from television shows, but also using those. So when they want to go somewhere, maybe they're saying or when they want to do something, they're saying octonauts, let's do this. And using that whole phrase saying, hey mom, let's go do something right now. And then other phrases that might be commonly used at home, don't worry, be happy, something like that. This individual was evaluated by the local school district and qualified for special education services when they turned 3, and were placed in an early childhood program. And they are also receiving occupational and speech therapy. The student was able to communicate some snack requests, meal preferences, some specific toys or activities in the classroom through the picture exchange communication system, or PECS, a PECS book with an I want symbol. So that's sort of that background history on our individual. The school SLP began exploring high-tech AAC with the student and looked at the following vocabularies. So LAMP words for life, TD Snap, Touch Chat with word power. And then some of those features that were considered were definitely a system that had access to bilingual pages. Thinking about that grid size, or the number of squares or buttons on a page, and how we can maybe filter or limit some of that vocabulary so that it can grow with the student. An idea called motor planning, where the buttons aren't moving, the words aren't moving all around on the page. They're sticking in the same location even as the page is changing. And then organization of the vocabulary. So wanting access to single words so you can build a sentence with those language and grammar skills developing, as well as still having access to some phrases. And so I'm going to just kind of show you a couple of those systems. So thinking back to that feature matching image that Abby explained to us before, again, we have hardware, access, software, and page set. So we're thinking about TD Snap, and I'm going to just flip the page here so you can see this is TD Snap page set. And here's the Spanish pages on the upper left and the English pages on the upper right. And you can see that we have some of those core language words, those little words that help build our sentences on here. So that is our TD Snap vocabulary. That was the motor planning 30-page set with the bilingual pages. And that has a taxonomic organization of the vocabulary, meaning that the vocabulary has to be organized in some way. So it's organized by the feature and the function of the word. This vocabulary also has access to some behavioral support, such as first, then, and sequences. So you can see that on the lower images. So first I do my work, then I can play. And for young kids with autism, it's really hard, sometimes difficult to transition between activities. So these behavioral supports can help them know what's expected and what's coming. And you can customize some of these sequences or first thens to their to their day. So those were features that we were kind of looking at within that motor planning page set that really would be why we might pick that over another vocabulary. This page set also offers direct selection for this individual, and a key guard is available. So a key guard is actually sort of like a piece of plastic, and I'm going to kind of hold up one, hopefully you guys can see it here, but it's just sort of like a grid, a plastic grid. Sometimes they're clear, sometimes they're not, and the individual can fit their finger in there, and it helps just with getting the right button sometimes. And some people that have not even like a lot of motor issues sometimes just do better with a key guard. So it's always good to try one and see if it helps make that student more or individual more successful. And then thinking about the hardware, we could look at TEP funding for this individual. We could also look at Tobii Dynavox has their SC Tablet Mini, which is an iPad-based device, thinking really about getting that mini size, that 8-inch screen, because this is a little 4-year-old. So they are mobile, they're on the run all the time, on the go, and you want something that they can bring with them without too much effort. Tobii Dynavox also has a larger device, the i110, that's a Windows dedicated device. And sometimes for some of our kiddos who have a lot of access to tablet technology, getting something that looks like an iPad is not always the best thing. They know that home button, they can hit that home button. So some families choose to go with, some of the company's other devices like an i110. The next vocabulary that we looked at was LAMP words for life. One of the reasons we considered this software was it could be loaded on a Kiwanis iPad. So this individual has autism. The family could fill out the Kiwanis application. But thinking about that Kiwanis iPad offers no warranty. So our little 4-year-olds, and I would always plan on an individual, whether it's an adult or a child, plan on that device breaking at least once within that 5-year lifespan of a communication device. And if the family can't afford to repair something, most common breaks usually for the students I work with are screen breaks. If the family can't afford to get that iPad repaired, getting a dedicated communication device through insurance that comes with a warranty can offer a lot of peace of mind. You find that families are willing to take it out and do more with it if they know that it's okay if it breaks, that it can get repaired and it won't cost me any money to do that. So PRC's Accent 800, which is an 8-inch screen, so like that mini size, has a 5-year warranty, which includes 3 accidental breaks. Now that's the manufacturer's warranty. Most insurance companies will cover repairs as well. So beyond those 3 accidental breaks, if it's still within that 5-year period and the manufacturer's warranty won't cover it anymore, you can go to things like Medicaid and ask them to pay for a repair. But it requires the speech language pathologist getting involved and doing that documentation. Again, thinking about direct selection and needing a key guard, and the page set also offered some different vocabulary options. So here's LAMP words for life. You can see there's a lot of words on a page, but it has a tool called Vocabulary Builder where you can type in the word and it will automatically hide all the rest of the words and only make available the words that maybe you're targeting and learning those motor plans for. So I might be working on an I want phrase and I want more, I want to stop. You can see visually it's easier to find those than the 2 pictures up above with the full page set of words. But we don't want to live here forever. This is limiting that individual's vocabulary. So we want to make sure we can easily toggle between, teaching maybe during a therapy session or during a meal time, teaching where these words are, toggle it off, toggle all the words back on, and then see, can they still find I and want and maybe eat crackers or something like that. And then the last page set that we considered for this individual was Touch Chat HD with word power. Again, maybe this might be a personal iPad. The family already has it and they just want to use their own iPad and buy the app. Some of these apps are very expensive. Some of the apps are up to $300. So it's not just your $1.99 app that you're going to buy off of the App Store. So maybe this family can afford to purchase that app. They have a personal iPad. Again, there's no product warranty. If we were going through the company PRC Satillo, we might be looking at their Via Pro or their Via Mini with a dedicated device that offers that product warranty from the company, the manufacturer warranty, along with then insurance being able to fund some of those repairs. PRC Satillo also offers key guards that are available, so it wouldn't be a cost out of pocket for the family if they went with that dedicated device. I'm going to show you some of the page sets here. So these page sets are a little different because we can start out with a like 25 location page set. We could work our way up to a 42 or 48. So that page set means the number of pictures on the page, and then we could even grow that child's vocabulary up to 60. One thing I want to point out when you go this route is that the buttons shift or move. So if I scroll back to Lamp Words for Life, the benefit to just hiding some of these is that want is always going to be in the same location. It never moves. But if we look back over here, we can see I want is sort of, I don't know, middle of the page. Now we have shifted I to kind of the upper corner and want is way down at the bottom. And then if we move up to our 60 location page, again, it shifts those buttons. So if you think about typing on your keyboard, if we were shuffling around the keys on your keyboard, it would make you a highly inefficient typer. So sometimes it's better to just think about these features that hide vocabulary, but keep the same location of the button versus growing your vocabulary by starting with a 20 or 25 location page and then working your way up to a 60 location page. So all the different vocabularies, or I shouldn't say all, a lot of them offered sort of different features that allow you to limit some of the vocabulary for teaching purposes. And both of these, all these page sets also offer both Spanish and English. And some of the symbols, I didn't mention this previously, but some of the different vocabularies or software also offer diversity symbols. And that can be an important consideration when you're working with a lot of individuals. We have Somali families. We have a lot of individuals in our area in Green Bay that wear hijabs. You know, are there different symbols that can really represent that individual who's using those vocabularies? Can be very important. So those are some of the features when we're thinking about vocabularies and working with young children that we might want to consider. So Abby's going to talk a little bit more about somebody who has a progressive diagnosis.
Absolutely. So this profile is an adult who has a diagnosis of ALS or amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. This is often known as Lou Gehrig's disease as well. This diagnosis is one where an individual begins to lose their motor control, which impacts their entire body. So it can start peripherally with loss of movement in their hands and feet first, or it can also start more centrally, what they call bulbar onset, which starts more with speech and swallowing and breathing and moves outward. So the individual we're going to talk about is a 57-year-old male who was diagnosed 4 months ago, lives at home with his wife and 3 children, and they also have, he has 3 adult children and 1 grandchild. He's a retired veteran and works part-time as a computer programmer. His initial symptoms primarily started with those motor changes, like weakness in his left hand and foot and some coordination difficulties. And then he started to begin noticing slower speech rate and some vocal fatigue later in the day after talking for a long time. And so for individuals with ALS or other progressive diagnoses, we're often thinking about feature matching across time and selecting AAC systems that they can use as things change. So they may not always be using the same things. For an individual right at the beginning of their diagnosis, we're often recommending what's called voice preservation. And this focuses on recording their speech to save examples of their speech that they can use later if they become unable to talk at all. Message and voice banking are two different processes. Message banking is recording exact replicas of their speech, and voice banking is training a synthesized voice to sound like them. So it would be that computerized voice, but instead of being a generic sounding voice, it would be a computerized voice that sounds like them. Additionally, for this man or for people in this situation, we recommend backup strategies to their speech, like writing and manual boards, or alternative mouse options for accessing technology, like a trackball or a stylus. And I'm going to go to if we go to the next slide, I can kind of show some examples of these. So for example, with writing, it might be just a typical paper and pencil to write out what you need to say if someone's not understanding your speech. Or there are some really cool things like these boogie boards that are pictured here. That's pictured here on the far left. It's like an LCD tablet. So it's it makes me think of like a kiddo tablet where you can write something on it. And then there's a delete button where you can erase it and reset it. And then similarly, there are whiteboard apps on different tablets or phones. The second picture from the left on this slide shows a tablet that has a whiteboard app on it where it says, "This is the Microsoft Whiteboard app." So you can just write right on the screen of your phone or tablet and someone else can read it. Additionally, manual communication boards can be really important. So the two pictures on the right side of this slide show a grid layout. The first is a letter board. So each letter of the alphabet is in a separate square on the board. And then the second one is a phrase board. So again, each grid has a different phrase or category. And these boards can be used both by pointing to the letters to spell out or pointing to the phrase that you want to communicate, or they can be used through a strategy that's called partner assisted scanning, where you have a partner who goes through the different rows and columns, and you just the communicator just indicates when they get to the letter or the phrase that they want to say. And we have more information. I can put a link to a video that explains partner assisted scanning into the chat at the end of the presentation. I should have added that to the slides. Okay, so these are often the places we start for an individual who still is speaking, but they're having some difficulty being understood. As things change further, so as they have more speech progression, where maybe they're not as easy to understand, then we think about other communication strategies. So the changes in function at this point might include experiencing dysarthria, which is unclear speech, difficulty articulating. And with that, typically there's reduced speech intelligibility. So reduced ability for partners to understand what they're saying. For this person, especially fatigue and breath support played a big role in that. So using a breathing machine at night impacted his ability to communicate using speech. At this point, he was also experiencing more weakness in his left hand, but still able to use his right hand for pointing and accessing his phone or tablet or other technology. And at this point, he was no longer working. So it was difficult because it was difficult for partners to understand his speech, it impacted his ability to continue in his job. So our assessment and the considerations at this point shifted more towards beginning to use more assistive technology, but still using a touchscreen device where he could point to the different things he wanted to communicate. We focused on text-based page sets. So remember that feature matching piece, we're really looking at things where he can spell or read phrases and use those phrases. And then we're also thinking about the changes to the AAC system over time with progression and minimizing his relearning. So setting up systems that will work right now with his hands, but down the road, if he experiences more motor progression, being able to use other access methods. And so the next slide shows that feature matching chart again. So at this point, we're looking for small transportable hardware like a phone or a tablet, something that he's easily able to carry with him throughout his day and across environments. And then we're also looking at a clamp mount that has, or we got him a clamp mount that has a flexible arm so that you can position his phone or tablet in a place where he can easily reach it with his right hand, but doesn't have to use his left hand to hold it because, again, he's experienced that motor change in his hand. We're also, another feature we're trying to look for at this point is the access. So is he continuing to use direct touch on the screen? Is he using some kind of an alternative mouse or stylus? So holding a, maybe he can't isolate a pointer to point to things with his finger, but maybe he can use his whole fist to hold on to kind of a stylus that has a pointer at the end that he can use to touch the screen. And then we also want to look for features related to customizability of the keyboard and the font size and button size so that he can be as accurate as possible while using this touchscreen device. The software that we ended up looking at for him is called Speech Assistant, and I'll show you a picture of that app on the next slide. But I want to point out here that this is just one version of an accessible communication system. And so there are lots of different apps that can be appropriate for this population or any population, similar to what Jennifer was talking about with kids. Or with a beginning communicator, you always need to look at the features of the system and kind of pick the app or the tool that works the best. So this is what the Speech Assistant app looks like. And it's got, you can see across the top, there's a white bar. The picture on the left is showing the Android version of this app, and the picture on the right is showing the iPhone version of this app. But both of them have similar features. So there's a text bar at the top of each app where you can type in, it will pull up a keyboard and you can type in specific words or messages. And then along the middle of the app, there are some gray categories for common phrases, food and drink, at home messages, at work messages. And these can all be customized to be categories that are relevant to the individual. And then you can see on the right picture that under those gray categories, there are also white buttons with phrases on them, like my name is, my phone number is, my email is. So this is a place where you can program common messages and phrases to increase efficiency with communicating those things that the person might say over and over again. So this is kind of that middle progression area where maybe the person their speech isn't as functional, but they're still able to use their hands to access their phone or their tablet. The next step in the progression for this individual and for many individuals with progressive diagnosis is motor progression. And so we will look at later on in his diagnosis, he started to have speech that was completely unintelligible, so not able to use speech to communicate anymore at all. His motor abilities also diminished, so he was no longer able to walk independently. He was using a power wheelchair for ambulation, and his hand function was very limited with minimal movement or control. And so at this point in the diagnosis, we start to look at assessing for use of alternative access like eye gaze, head pointing, or switch access. And again, we need to consider at this point how that tool is going to support him as things change over time. So we're not only considering functions for communication, but we're also thinking about how he can use this device for computer access, controlling the environment, like turning lights on and off or starting the TV, using social media or other kinds of internet functions, and then also possibly some executive functioning supports like having his schedule on his device or having checklists or task lists so that he can show kind of what needs to happen throughout the day in an accessible way to him. And so the feature matching for this individual really shifted to looking more at hardware that would allow him to use alternative access. So Jennifer, if you can go to the next slide, we'll look at that feature matching chart again. So for this person, we started looking at the hardware that would have operating systems that allow for alternative access. So it's important to know that not every communication device offers the same features for eye gaze or scanning or head pointing or those other strategies. So an important part of the assessment and feature matching is to identify hardware that will work for those things. That we also considered, and it's important to consider mounting equipment for these tools, especially when you think about someone using eye gaze or a head pointer. The device has to be positioned in a very particular place for that access to work. And so we want the person to be able to use it when they're in their wheelchair, in a recliner or other seating, when they're in their bed. And so mounting equipment that positions the device across those positions is really important for them to have access at all times. Related to access, we also are trialing things like eye gaze control, head tracking. And again, this assessment looks at his head movement and his neck movement and what's going to give him the most opportunity to communicate. One thing that's important to consider here is fatigue as well. For people with progressive diagnoses, the action that they're using to communicate needs to be repeatable, and they need to be able to do it across their day. And so if moving their head and neck gets really tiring, a head pointer might not work all day. But if their head can remain really still and all they have to do is move their eyes for eye gaze, that may be less fatiguing and more sustainable across their day. So those are all factors to consider. And then one other important thing we like to point out for people who are using eye tracking devices is that eye health is really important for maintaining access to those devices. The camera on an eye gaze device is reading the reflection, or what they call the glint, off the corneal surface of the eye. So it knows where you're looking based on that glint. If your eye becomes really dry or unhealthy, the camera can't pick up that glint anymore, and then that eye gaze access won't work. And so being proactive about using eye drops and helping somebody who's using eye gaze to maintain eye health is really important. Similarly to the previous feature matching for the apps, we're always looking for software and page sets that offer features for customizing, setting up phrases and categories for more efficient communication, as well as using things like word prediction to increase the efficiency when they're typing novel messages. So on the next slide, there's a picture of just to show an example of a device that would work for somebody who's using it not only for communication, but also for other functions. So on the left, you can see there is a grid of different squares. One is called Speak, which takes you to a keyboard for typing messages out. There's also a My Phrases area where the individual can have stored categories and phrases similar to the other app. But you'll also see lots of squares on these two pictures for email, text messaging. On the right, there's YouTube, Facebook, Netflix, texting, SMS messaging. And so you can see that these systems include not just communicative functions, but also ways to communicate through social media or other modalities as well, which is really important. And then on the final slide for this profile, I did just highlight some other examples of device functions, like those computer access functions, internet browsing, or using the phone or texting or email. They can also be used for environmental control, setting up a way to control your TV with the eye gaze device or other device, voice control for things like Alexa, Siri, and Google. I'm sorry if I just set all your devices off, saying that out loud. And then the other really cool thing that can be set up with communication devices is smart home systems. So with all the way the technology is now, you can get plugs and lamps and other things that allow you to lock the doors or turn the lights on and off, or even turn the water on and off in your sink. And so having smart home control is another feature of those advanced systems that can be really useful for an individual to maintain their autonomy and their independence as they are progressing in their diagnosis. Okay.
I would also jump in and say a lot of kids really like the voice control things. My own kids who are verbal, every morning, we'll say, hey, what's the weather today? And have, the weather read out loud to them. And so I have found that we can't necessarily do it in school because of privacy issues, but working with families to set up some of those, like, hey, tell me a joke, or, just play my favorite song list, some of those types of of things can be very, very motivating even for young kids to do, as well as emailing mom during the day. So some of those different features are also important to school devices as well.
Absolutely. I think that's all the information for profile 2. So we could potentially move into questions, any questions about the profiles as well as anything we've talked about today. I'm glad we got through it with still some time for questions. So we're happy to have some discussion. It looks like I will point out just one discussion in the chat was about the issues with using AAC over the phone. And if a person or a business picks up the phone and they hear that kind of computerized voice, often they think it's a robocall and will hang up. And so there was some discussion in the chat about recording a button so that it's in someone's voice, so that instead of that computerized voice, it's a recorded message that says, hey, I'm using a computer to help me communicate. Please don't hang up. I need extra time to compose my message. And so we were talking about different systems that allow to do that. And Jennifer posted a link to where specifically with the app ProLoco to Go, you can record on a button, but I think almost all communication systems do have a way to do that. It's just a matter of finding it in the settings. And so if you're using a different app or a different communication system and you're not sure how to record a voice onto a button, you can look on the website for that app or device, or you could also call their technical support line and ask them to walk you through it.
And Tammy, I think Laura is going to share out the PDF as well as you can access the Google Slides via the bit.ly and the QR code as well, which I think they're right there. If you need those, click.
Perfect. Thanks for coming, Tammy. It's great to see you. Ian says, have you ever utilized the app Project Relate from Google? Jennifer, I'm a little familiar with this one if you want me to start.
Sure.
So Project Relate, for anybody who's not familiar, Project Relate is it's a Google project that I think is still kind of in beta. So they're still kind of testing it and growing it, but I do think anyone can access it now. You just have to reach out to them directly to request access. And the idea behind it is to create better speech recognition for people who have non-standard speech. So for example, when you talk into your phone and you say, hey Siri, what's the weather today, or whatever it is, and there goes my phone. Those apps and those softwares typically only understand kind of standard speech, but both Google and another company called VoiceIt, VoiceItt, are also developing softwares or apps where it learns to understand less standard speech. So someone who has dysarthria or another articulation difference, they can talk into the app and then it can do a bunch of things with that. It can either do the typical, like tell you the weather or transcribe a text message, but it can also do live captioning. So some of these apps are creating where when you're on a Zoom meeting, the person who is using non-standard speech, whatever they're saying can be captioned. And it can also be used for general like text generation. I have used it with people, a little bit with people who have ALS. I think the trick with Project Relate is that right now it's only available for someone over 18 years old because of privacy and kind of those security reasons. I don't think children are yet allowed to use it. I think a goal would be that eventually anyone could, but that's one con of that Project Relate is that I don't think it's accessible or usable if you're under 18 years old.
Yeah, and I attended a session at the Assistive Technology Industry Association, or ATIA conference, and one of the speech therapists, who I think is out of England, that's been working on Project Relate, had said that there at this time were there were no plans for making it available to anybody under 18 in the near future that he knew of. So that's why we have not done a lot of it in the school district at all.
Yes. And I think the other thing, because Project Relate is a Google tool. It's only available on like Android or I don't even know if you can do it on Windows based. It might only be Android. The Voice It one, which I'll put in the chat, I think I think there is an app for it on both Android and iOS systems or iPads or iPhones. But that one also requires a subscription, a monthly subscription. So you can try it for free for like 30 days or something like that. And then if you like it and it's useful, then you would start paying to maintain access to it.
Another question that we got in the chat was somebody said that it was difficult to find SLPs who are familiar or comfortable with AAC assessment for adults and work with MA. Are there any resources or listings in the state that help identify SLP resources that might be of assistance? I don't know of any specifically. I don't know, Abby, if you do, but I have found that if you do reach out, like if there is an app or a vocabulary that you are interested in already. So let's say you're looking at Tobii Dynavox, reaching out to the Tobii Dynavox reps. They often know of people they've worked with in different areas of the state in the past that have experience with AAC. So those reps sometimes can be helpful. I would say our biggest clinic in the state of Wisconsin is the Weissman Center, which is affiliated with the UW. So that's probably our biggest one, but there are wait lists there usually that are quite long. If you have a degenerative condition, oftentimes you can get in more quickly than if you don't. So,
yeah, and I think that the piece about working with MA specifically can be really variable. Being a Medicaid provider has some some pros and some cons, and it can be difficult. So I think that also is tricky. One thing I would love, or I hope that can grow is if speech language pathologists are part of ASHA, our national professional organization, there is a what they call Profind website where speech language pathologists can register on ASHA and say, I'm in this area and these are the practice areas I'm in this location, I should say, and these are the practice areas that I'm comfortable with. And so you can list yourself and say, I'm in Madison, Wisconsin, and I have AAC. I am comfortable working with AAC. And then anybody can go on that website and search for professionals in their area. The trick is that I don't think a lot of SLPs currently put their information on there. And so if there may be somebody in an area of the state that we just don't know about because they haven't listed it. But I think if you find someone who is comfortable and familiar in doing AAC services, encourage them to list themselves on the ASHA Profind website. And I can put it in the chat too, because that's a really good way for us to grow more resources and more networking across the state about who is doing this practice and who can help support that. I'll grab that website. There it is. Okay, let me copy this.
Another question we got, are OTs able to are able to assess for AAC under their license? For AAC right now, it is just speech language pathologists. However, most most clinics assess as a team. Even within the school district, we have an occupational therapist on our assistive technology team who really helps me look at some of the different access methods, sometimes positioning. I work very closely with our physical therapists and even some of our teachers of the visually impaired, working with them for all sorts of different vision issues that may come about and affect the use of AAC. So again, it is a collaborative process, but when you're looking at funding through insurance, a communication device, then it is a speech language pathologist scope of practice.
Looks like there's another question about if we have recommendations for young adults who have graduated high school and use AAC, how do we ensure the ongoing support piece? Any recommendations for the families, especially if those families have never really used the communication device with their children and wouldn't really know if it's still working for them? When I think about this piece, Julie, I think a lot about like what are the resources that are repeatable and you can use over and over. And so I think going to the vendor websites is often a good place to go. They frequently have, so whoever made that communication device, whether it's Tobii Dynavox or PRC Saltillo is another company, or Talk to Me Technologies. So finding out the manufacturer of the communication device that they're using and then going to their website, they often have recorded trainings about the device, how to use it. And those trainings include both like technical things, like how do I program a button, as well as actual implementation things, like how do I use it for communicating about different things or in different settings. And so going to the vendor website can be a really good place to get some specific information about that device. And then also it's repeatable. So if it's a recorded training, they can watch it over and over. Obviously it takes time and they have to designate that time to be able to do it. But that can be a great place to get tips and ideas about how to continue supporting the system. And then Jennifer put up our resources slide here, which I think is also important. These are all great places to go for supports related to AAC. The Weissman Center Echo recordings, the second from the bottom, that also has a lot of recorded trainings about implementation of AAC. And if you go to that website, there's a table of contents that lists like the different topics that were discussed in different trainings. And so you can go directly to the recording of a training that's about a topic that's relevant to that person. So I think that's important. And then the other one I'd love to point out on here is the Wisconsin AAC Network, which is run by Mike Hipple, who's an adult with cerebral palsy. And it's really his mission to make sure that everyone in Wisconsin who uses AAC is well connected and well resourced. And so I think he could be a great support, both for the family members in terms of counseling and teaching, but also like a peer and a mentor for that adult who's using AAC. So I would definitely check out his website and contact him as well. Jennifer, do you have other thoughts?
Like I know the Angelman syndrome website has some nice recordings. AbleNet has lots of recordings. Kelly Fonner does a lot in the state of Wisconsin, and I know she's done some great webinars for, is it the AbleNet Academy? I can't remember what it's called, but it would be on their website. There's tons of resources, and not only just device manufacturers, but also some of the app websites. So there is like a Lamp Words for Life website. There is a Touch Chat website, because some of those vocabularies have been developed by people, not just the AAC manufacturers. So you can find those resources. But that is the benefit of going with a dedicated communication system, is that you do have the product support. I mean, the devices are vastly different in cost compared to just buying tablet technology off the shelf, but it is that product rep you can call, usually a technical support number, and have them walk you through how to program a button if you forget. So I think there are some really, really great websites that are out there, and just reaching out to those vendors, reaching out to the app developers, and really utilizing all those resources for trainings. The AT Forward project, although it's sponsored by the Department of Public Instruction, or DPI, they have during the school year, they have a community of practice meeting where you can, actually unmute, ask questions. You can learn, and just because you're a young adult, maybe outside of school, doesn't mean that you might not benefit from some of that same information. So definitely lots of great resources within our state. I think we're getting back to really developing AAC in our state again, and we have some really nice things going again, post-COVID.
I think that the last thing I would just add to is that ongoing support doesn't have to be from a professional. I think, like, of course, professionals are an important tool in your tool belt, right? Being able to have someone who can provide that hands-on training and support is important. But ultimately, the person using AAC needs partners around them every day in their life to help make sure that things continue to be useful. So these resources for training partners are so essential because ultimately their parents, their caregivers, their friends, and those are the people that need to understand and know how to provide that ongoing support as well. So we understand it's not a light lift. It is a heavy lift to really learn. It's like learning a different language, but it's really, really essential for success. And Laura added that if a young adult is enrolled in their long-term care, it may be possible to have support for specific training written into their service plan. And so that could be a great way to also build in some of that support as well.
And Abby, this is Laura, and I'll just add to that. Like, so for example, if someone is looking at employment and they need to transition to using their AAC device in an employment setting. So that's something they can work with DVR, and whether there's some financial support for a trainer to get the device programmed. But again, I wholeheartedly support your emphasis on natural supports, and just the importance of having that happen as well.
Absolutely. I think the last question in the chat too is if we've ever used the app Speak My Mind. I am not familiar with that one. Jennifer, I don't know if you have heard of Speak My
Speak for
Mind.
Yourself is an app I've heard of that's kind of similar to that, but not that one.
I think one thing that's both a blessing and a curse with like the tech revolution with iPads and apps is that things are so much more accessible now. Like, buying an iPad and an app can be far less expensive and more available than like a dedicated communication device. However, what that can sometimes mean is, and I'm not saying this is the case for Speak My Mind because I'm not familiar with it, but some apps get developed by really well-meaning parents who are also, parents of a child who has a disability, or family members of an adult who has a disability, who are really well-meaning and they know how to create apps, but they don't necessarily have that background in language and communication development. And so you just have to be a really conscious consumer of apps and things like that to find, make sure that they are systems that are going to support that long-term growth of communication versus like focusing on just being able to make requests. And again, I don't know Speak My Mind, so I don't want to say that that's what this is, but just generally I would put that plug in about being careful and conscientious about selecting apps.
I think just like we get device abandonment, there's also app abandonment. I mean, if I look through like all the apps in my iTunes account, like tons of them are no longer being updated. And so I always think about some of those apps and vocabularies that have been around for a long time, because I don't want somebody to put in all that work and effort to learn a vocabulary, to learn a language, and then have, that well-meaning parent or whoever developed that app then abandon it. So I think that is also certainly something to consider. Yes, there are lots of free choices out there. But again, if it's free or very low cost, what are the chances that in 10 or 20 years, that vocabulary is still going to be out there? So I tend to stick with ones and from companies that I know have been around a long time, because I don't want them to lose their language. So
yeah, excellent points, Jennifer and Abby, especially on the app, the vetting of apps, reading the reviews, when was it last updated? Just like we would use our good consumer practices for any kind of product that we're looking to buy or get. Just because it's an assistive technology device, you don't throw out all the best practices related to just consumerism. And because you're purchasing a product, just like if you purchased a television or a toaster or a car, you still want to have those skills. Just because it's assistive technology doesn't make it any different. So, wow, this webinar was fantastic. I can't thank you both enough for the wealth of information that you have provided for our audience today. And so just a reminder, this is being recorded. It will be archived on the WisTech YouTube channel, and you'll get a survey that pops up after this. And hopefully it also pops up tomorrow's email. Last week we had a little technical glitch. But please fill out your survey. We'd love to see your feedback. And especially if you are wanting the CRC and CEU certificates, it's required for you to fill that out. There will be a link to the handout on that survey. And we've got 3 more this year coming up. So hope to see you all back for our future trainings. And thank you again, Jennifer and Abby. We'll be in touch.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.